But let me introduce this first panel, which is related to a lot of things that you said, because I think there's a lot of uncertainty around guidelines, how to use their guidelines. So Sylvia's talk was about the technical application, so to say, of guidelines, guidance and systems. And we want to now talk a little bit about the human in all this guideline, guidance, framework, so to say. So as Alfie said in the beginning of this workshop, is that we're trying to focus on two specific topics in this workshop, and one of this is teaching and learning visualizations, because it's highly strongly related to guidelines for many reasons. Because one of the main reasons is that we use guidelines in teaching and education, among many other things. Because visualization is becoming a public topic, it's becoming more widely known, at least due to the current pandemic situation, I guess, that we're in. More people are confronted with visualization. There are more and more teachers and courses out there. We're teaching visualization courses. My courses are full. I'm asked to teach more and more courses in this topic. And we have even on the panel some people who teach 3.5 courses this year already. I can't get back to this later. So many academics teach, in fact, visualization. That's what I can talk about at least. But not only academics, there are a lot of courses outside university from freelancers or from other professionals who offer courses from The Guardian, for example, Curve, and so on and so on. So teaching is not just academic, but it's wider than that, of course. And the different resources right now on teaching and so on, and different styles. So the one thing that we almost know best is the classroom teaching, but if you think for informal learning, and especially if people don't have access to courses, then how can we deliver guidance or the guidelines, or at least provide resources for those people wanting to learn? And what we're missing, of course, is methods and activities and so on to help everyone teaching, because it's such a broad topic, as I think. Now, there is more about this to say. There is another workshop tomorrow at the same time as today. Now that everyone has their in Europe at least, knows the right time, so it's going to be exactly the time as tomorrow. On data viz activities, which is about teaching and visualization. It's going to be a workshop as long as this one, and I strongly invite you to come to this one. I'm just seeing that my connection. So the goal of this panel is to reflect on teaching visualization. We've invited 5 fantastic panelists. We want to discuss teaching methods, role of guidelines in teaching, of course. What activities are we using to teach people or to support learning? This is where I think we also need to think about guidance for guidelines in a sense. And of course, challenges and so on and so on. Questions, again, during this panel, you can put them into Discord, or you can put this into this Google Sheet, which is going to show on this slide as we go along with the panel. So don't worry for now. Okay, let me introduce our 5 fantastic panelists. It's quite a challenging task to choose just 5 people out of this wonderful sort of visualization community, academic and non-academic. So we had a hard time, and we're sorry for everyone we could not really divide here. We tried to balance different things in choosing persons for this panel. Different asked to use these 5 panelists to you, and each of these panelists will be asked after I read or introduce each panelist through a short bio. We will ask the panelists to provide us with a short position statement in relation to the topic, and then we're going to open the floor to everyone in the Discord, YouTube, and of course on the call here. So don't be afraid, just drop in your questions. We're going to take them and read them out as we go along. Our first panelist is, and I ordered them alphabetically, so there's no meaning in the order. It except for the last name. No, last name alphabetical order. So our first panelist is Professor Sheelagh Carpendale, who is now a professor at Simon Fraser University and a research chair in information visualization at the School of Computing at Simon Fraser University. She has a background in computer science and visual arts. She leads the innovation in visualization in the VIS research group in Calgary, as many of you know. And now Sheelagh moved to Simon Fraser, where she heads the newly established Interactive Experiences Lab, short IX Lab. She has been introduced into both the IEEE Visualization Academy and the ICM Chi Academy, and has received many awards, including the IEEE Career Award. So congratulations to all these awards. I'm not going to read out all these awards now in order being conscious of time. But you got, among others, 2 Best Supervision Awards, which I find quite a nice type of award actually to give out, and congratulations again for this award. This is highly strongly related to what we're discussing today. And in Sheelagh's work, she started to work on many innovative approaches to visualization and interaction, but also for teaching. Some of the examples you can see on the slides, to teaching visualization to all sorts of audience using tokenizations, using sketching, as she's also one of the co-authors of this book, Sketching the User Experience. So I don't want to lose more time on this. I want to hand over the microphone to Sheelagh to read out her position statement. And hello again, Sheelagh. Thanks for joining us on this panel. And I hope the microphone switch will work properly.
Can people hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
That's okay. So I don't know how, well, I will sort of follow my position statement. I definitely want to start with that this whole experience is a process of lifelong learning, and this last year has definitely driven that home. I think, I guess one of the things that I wanted to say is that, that I've had several different points where I've actually thought, I was starting to get a handle on teaching and how I wanted to teach, and then this year has changed everything, and I'm finding that all kinds of things that I think will translate don't seem to, and then I did find that some do. So online is very different, and part of that is because philosophically I have I really do think as we learn from Piaget that we learn best by active doing. So then the question is, how can you have active doing when somebody is just starting, and how does that work? And I use the whole notion of proximal learning or scaffolding, which has really, that's the thing that has been very hard to figure out how to translate into online, because it has to do a lot with the subtle exchanges that happen peer-to-peer and with being there. That's why it's actually called proximal learning, right? And that's been hard to do and hard to figure out how to re-establish. But the other thing that I wanted to say, I think almost the most important thing for me to say in this panel and this workshop on guidelines is that guidelines are sort of relatively new. I think they sort of started appearing in HCI in the mid-late 90s, and they're fading a little now, and I think appropriately. And they're zooming up to the fore in VIS, and that in the design world, and it's interesting because in the 90s when I first started looking for design texts, I could find this kind of statement, and some of them actually made it like very strong. Let's say that you are foolish not to learn the guidelines of your discipline, but you're even sillier if you follow them. And we don't have the second part in our community, and I think it is actually really important that guidelines are really useful in that, and they have a kind of built into them a way of thinking. So people who go through a particular process often enough, or a group who goes through it often enough, develops a set of guidelines, which they then distribute to other people. And they're very useful. I think it is good to learn other people's voices, but you have to remember it's not your own voice. The guidelines will take you to decent. And decent is a very good aim when you're starting and you're a novice. But it is not really the end goal. And the other thing that I wanted to talk about, and I actually brought here, like, I don't know, see if I could bring my catch open, because I thought, but I don't know how many, there's a difference between the notion of guidelines, and I have one, this is from the design world, I don't know if you know Chip Kidd, but if we have a bit of time, and I'm not going to read it right now, because I think we're short on time, but there's one of his guidelines, and I thought the strength of the words and the way they talk about it, and the way they leave things like completely open within a guideline, might be interesting. So Benjamin, and if you want later, I can read this, but not now because I think we're running out of time. And the other is the notion of cards. And cards are something that we are not using so much in VIS yet, and I think we should explore further. And they are, like the pack that I have in my hand is from Ideal. They have 51 cards, and they're more like triggers. They're not telling you what to do. They're more like giving you a wider universe to pick ideas from. And anyway, it's a different approach of guidance than a list of guidelines. And so I think that's what I wanted to say. Thanks.
Thanks, Sheelagh. And there's more time to work more. Thanks for the pointer to reading out examples later. We have our next panelist, our second panelist, Arzu Sheelagh. I hope I pronounced his name correctly. Arzu, are you on the call now? You are there. I can see you.
I am here. I hope the microphone also works. Hi.
Welcome on board, Arzu. Arzu is a professor in human computer. Works perfectly. Arzu is a professor for human-computer interaction and extended reality at the Institute of Interactive Technologies at the University of Applied Sciences and Arts in northwestern Switzerland. Her research is focusing on geospatial visualizations and three-dimensional visualization. She's also affiliated with Harvard's Seamless Astronomy Lab. Arzu has been, as I found on the website, teaching 3.5 courses this year in visualization. That's a great university that has so many courses. She's having a lot of experience in teaching, and in fact, as I think she wants to show us now, is also providing a cheat sheet for visualization design on her CanQ VIS website. Thanks again, Arzu, for joining the panel, and over to you.
Thanks, Benjamin. Is that okay to share my screen?
We cannot hear you now. We could hear you. Yes, you should be able to do so. I will stop my one. We should have permissions to share everyone's screens.
I think Arzu's microphone got muted.
Yeah. Arzu, we don't hear you. Well, her microphone shows on in Zoom. Arzu, we don't hear you.
Is it working now?
Now it's working, yes.
Okay, it was somehow hijacked by somebody else's, some other microphone. Is it also fine with my screen at the moment?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, and sorry for the glitch. To begin, as Benjamin mentioned, I'm teaching a number of classes in visualization. For the first year, we do fundamentals of visualization. Second semester, interactive visualization. Then we go to visual analytics. and there's an information visualization. There's 2 lines of teaching. One is in computer science, the other is data science. And in data science visualization, we find it to be an important topic. In this particular line of teaching in data science, we have been experimenting with kind of fully bottom-up project-based learning. So we give them challenges and describe projects. Sometimes I also borrow from actually the challenges that are published on, for example, VIS. And then we give them a fully annotated media library. So your books and sometimes your slides or YouTube videos. And then we put them on the task, and then we stand by for their questions. So basically, no frontal lectures. And it's been interesting. It's very experimental. I think that they work actually twice harder than normal students. But I think what they learn, it retains a little bit longer. I think they really learn this way. But I'm a bit conflicted about the balance between, what we actually provide them in terms of our expertise and how to do this frontal lecture versus hands-on experiences. So this is one of the things that I would like to maybe mention, because often I think we don't always have recipes in visualization. The answer is often, somebody approaches you and asks, how do I do this? It depends. It depends on a number of things. And I often share the framework that I published in a cartography conference recently, that it depends on technology that you're trying to use, whether it's the display type or whether social design elements would matter. Maybe HCI, you have to consider interaction design, or maybe you have to think about computational performance. So another dimension would be, it depends who your audience is. It could be they have certain cognitive and perceptual abilities, maybe some limitations in these abilities. So you have to perhaps personalize or customize how you're doing the visualization. So I also talk to them about context or task, or what is it that you're trying to achieve with the visualization. So there's a lot of factors. I'm not going to go through them because we only have 5 minutes, but just wanted to say that, we considered all kinds of details. Now, the second part, I do that also with my students, but I feel like we should get the word out to other scientists, our colleagues. In a recent study, we looked at a rainbow color scheme, and to see whether we have to still study the rainbows, we looked whether it's still being used commonly, and this was based on planetary science and remote sensing journals. And it goes up to like 70% of the quantitative visualizations that people still use rainbow. I think it's because it is the software default. And it feels like we need to get the word out to our colleagues other than those who come to the visualization conferences. I think that visualization community by now understands the limitations. But even here with the rainbow, the answer is it depends. It's not a blanket binary yes or no. It's true for pie charts and bar charts and all that. I think many of you are quite aware of this. So to be able to do this second part, the outreach of to our colleagues, Alyssa Goodman, actually mostly our conversation started this initiative. I would have to say that it's actually her idea. Kaya is here in the audience. So we started this 10qviz.org as a participatory place. We tried to come up with like 10 leading questions. Who is your audience? Is your goal to explore things or explain things? Is it that you have to show categories? Is it that you have to show recognize patterns? So instead of giving them answers, we try to formulate questions that they themselves would have to reflect. And then we would, give them some examples why this question might matter and annotate pictures. Everybody can contribute. So this is the 2 lines of arguments I wanted to sort of present as a position. Now I'm going to stop sharing my screen. By the way, I know that it's Z and some of you are allergic to that. We just had to pick something, and at that time it made sense because it's visualization. But I know that some people actually react badly to the Z. Okay, so that's the sidetrack. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope that we can discuss a little bit how to balance between these top-down and bottom-up approaches when we're talking about visualizations. I hope the microphone is still. I think I'm going to stop here, Benjamin.
It's always working. Thank you very much. And I don't know if there's any guidance on using Z or S. That would be nice to have some. Thanks, Arsu, and thanks for joining the panel again. Here, we go on. Our third panelist is Robert Laramee from the University of Nottingham, where he is an associate professor. Right now, he's covering a broad spectrum of work in scientific visualization, infovis, visual analytics. And Rob has recently nächsten visualization was available on YouTube. So I should have put the link here for you to do that in future. Welcome and on the panel, Rob, and over to you to your position statement.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Great. I'd like to just start off by thanking you, Benjamin, and the other organizers of the VisGuides Workshop. Thanks for inviting me here and to participate. I actually remember, I don't know why I remember this, but I remember my very first conversation about visualization guidelines. My very first conversation about visualization guidelines was a long time ago. It was probably like, I don't even remember exactly when it was. It was more than 10 years ago though, and it was with Colin Ware, Professor Colin Ware. So Colin was talking about his first information visualization book, and he was telling me about how he was working on his second edition. And I asked him, you know, what are the differences between the first and the second edition? And he said, well, one of the pieces of feedback he got on his first edition was that readers wanted guidelines. So the first edition of the book contains no visualization guidelines. I think you'll see in further editions, you'll see lots of visualization guidelines. And for some reason, I still remember this conversation, even though it was more than 10 years ago, I'm sure. And I remember my second conversation about visualization guidelines too, and that was with Min Chen. So Min Chen was asking me one day if I know about visualization guidelines and what visualization guidelines that I use in my lectures. And I had not really thought very much about it at the time. And I was thinking about my own class, and I'm like, well, actually my own class does not have very many visualization guidelines in it. My class has a little bit more algorithmic material, and I was like, that's funny because my class has a lot of algorithmic material which are not explicit guidelines actually. And then I learned about VisGuides.org through Alex Steele and Min Chen, and we started using that as a teaching tool actually. So it's actually built into the data visualization course we teach. And when I go through my slides now, I also realize that I have a lot of implicit guidelines. So the word guideline is not mentioned, but actually what I'm presenting on the screen or in a slide is often some guideline in some way, shape, or form. And so now when I update my slides, I'm having this guidelines lens applied, and I'm actually writing the word guideline to make some of them explicit. But like Arzu was saying, I think that writing guidelines for visualization is very challenging because it depends on the context. It's very hard to think of a guideline that doesn't come with a lot of constraints. For example, what is the user goal? What is the goal of what you're doing? Or what is the user task? So the guidelines depend on user goals and user tasks, so what you're trying to achieve, the background of the user, and so on. It could be presentation, it could be analysis, it could be exploration. So I find it very challenging to think of generic guidelines that really apply independent of contexts. And one kind of classic example is animation. Right? There's not really a consensus on whether animation is good. And the answer is really, well, it depends on the task. What is the task, or what is the goal of the visual design that you're trying to develop? And I think the same is true in real life. I think it's hard to think of guidelines that apply to real life. It's the challenge is that life is very complicated. So it's hard to think of black and white guidelines that just apply across all contexts and across the board. The only real life guideline I could think of that applies across the board is like, look both ways before you cross the street. But there aren't many guidelines that you can apply that really span all different contexts. Anyways, that's basically all I have to say for my position statement. I'm really looking forward to this discussion and all the things I can learn from it.
Thanks, Robert. We'll be having our fourth panelist, Sheelagh Padilla from the University of Merced, where she's an assistant professor right now. She's I'm dropping out again. Can you hear me? I was just restarting. We have Sheelagh Padilla on the panel as well, who's an assistant professor at UC Merced with a background in cognitive sciences and an MFA in design. She researches and studies uncertainty and right now in COVID data. She's also advocating for minoritized groups in STEM and is part of the VIS Diversity Committee. Sheelagh has been interviewed by the DataVis community DataVis Society, for about her teaching as part of a larger panel with Isabel Morelos, Jessica Hellman, Alberto Cairo, and Nicholas Elmquist and Steve Franconeri. So we can see how hard it is to pick people from this channel for this panel. So in her courses, she's focusing on problem-solving skills and using visualization as a tool to solve real-world problems. Thanks for joining this panel, and over to you, Sheelagh.
Great, thank you so much for having me. I'm very honored to be included as a member of this group. I'm a new assistant professor. This is my second year, so I'm also new to teaching. But for that reason and my background, I have a slightly different perspective. I am a cognitive scientist. That's what my PhD is in. And so I think about guidelines in terms of theories, which is a slightly different perspective. And then the theories that I teach in my courses have to do with how the mind processes visual information. So I think it was really interesting, the discussion about the pros and cons of guidelines and how guidelines can't be ubiquitous across all conditions because of so much context. The types of guidelines that I find most helpful and interesting to teach are based on the visual system and how our eye processes information, and how our brain processes information. And one thing that is pretty consistent across our human species is that we have the same hardware, some very similar properties, different contexts for how our expertise has influenced what we're doing, but we do have some similar things, which is why I find it very interesting to bring a cognitive science perspective. And what you're seeing in the bottom, that model, that process model there, is a model that we propose that describes the visualization decision-making pipeline, and it includes the full array of cognitive science that describes how we make decisions, how prior knowledge influences those decisions, how different things can be harder to process than others. So I like to use these types of frameworks to summarize large bodies of cognitive science and psychological research to help students understand why they would want to make a choice of one visualization technique over another. And the way that I frame that is the class that I currently teach is a graduate level course called Global Bird Studio. And the objective of the course is to solve large-scale global problems like COVID-19 miscommunication, wildfire visualization in California and other places. And what we do on the first day of class is I say, I want everyone to break up into groups and find the most important problem facing the world today, and we're going to try to solve it with visualization. And then we work backwards, trying to develop the visualization techniques they need to solve those problems. And we do that by thinking how people are processing information and so forth. That's kind of the main objective here. And so it takes the form a lot of uncertainty visualization, which is what I study And a lot of the problems that students are really interested in right now in my courses has to do with conveying uncertainty. So we did lots of discussions about that. That's really my perspective, a little bit shorter than everyone else's. But I think it's a more human-centered approach, and then we work backwards from these large-scale problems. And I forgot to mention this, we do, for the second part of the class, involve industry collaborators from Youth University Research Association. We bring them in, and they give us real-world problems. And we also have industry partners in Silicon Valley that come in and give us their problems to try to solve as well. I'm very, very much looking forward to this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, debate. And our last panelist, not last, but number 5, is Jonathan Roberts, who is a professor in visualization at the School of Computer Science and Electric Engineering at the Bangor University in Wales, where he's leading the research group on visualization modeling and computer graphics. In his work, he's designing and developing interactive visualization solutions. And Jonathan, I'm always having these issues with the UK names. It's tricky for someone not from the UK. So Jonathan has developed this 5 design sheets methodology, where he also published a book about it, which is called 5 Design Sheets, Creative Design and Sketching for Computing and Visualization, which is something to help students here in the center of this slide to develop visualization designs. And he has also, as he told us in the email, he created resources for learning processing through colorful rainbows. So we're all looking forward to learn about the colorful rainbows, as we have seen in Arsen's talk already. Thanks again for joining, Jonathan.
Okay, well, thanks very much for having me. Yes, I'm at the School of Computer Science and Electronic Engineering at Bangor University, and I have the privilege of teaching and educating students, and I really enjoy doing the 2 things I do. I teach and I research, and all my research, I guess, is visual, and all my teaching is visual. At the moment I teach a course to master students in information visualization, one for 3rd year bachelor courses in computer graphics, and lastly I also teach a design and sketching course. I
think you're breaking up.
Am I back?
Yes, you're back.
This is doing visualization conference at your home in the middle of Wales. I think with all my research, I try to help others. And it was about 10 years ago when some of my students said, "Well, you talk about design and visualization. How do you actually do it?" And it sort of got me thinking that there must be a strategy that we can help the students learn to do visualization design. And that's how the 5 design sheets came out. And so you end up with sheets of designs that helps you as a student, or helps you as a developer as well, to think through your different ideas. And also we've sort of taken that further and thought about the larger framework, and we've developed this system called the explanatory visualization framework that helps you to think about the sort of the wider aspect of applying the visualization kind of designs and getting a visualization implementation right. So I guess you're asking in the panel what sort of my standpoint is. Well, I think we should be developing guides. This is my first point. We should be developing guides, and those guides need to be simple and clear to follow. I think is sort of, we need to help others. Secondly, I feel that we need to use them ourselves. If we don't use them regularly, then who else is going to use them? We have to feel that they will work in our situation. If we can get them to work, then they will work for other situations. And that's what I've been doing. And you end up knocking off all those rough dents and rough bits of your ideas. And finally, I guess going back to, so we've gone full circle now. So Sheelagh at the beginning was talking very about this idea that guidelines are great for learners to follow. And I actually think that learners should follow them diligently, but also for experts to break. And I think we do need to understand that they have their place and they can be used for a positive reason, but also we need to know where they don't work and certain circumstances they don't work in. So as a challenge to the community is I think we need to develop guidance, guidelines, and then use them ourselves. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Jonathan. And at this point, I open the stage to the panelists, of course, and the audience for discussion. I'm just conscious of time, as always. This is my job in this workshop. Really, that we have about 30 minutes, unfortunately, but because I think then the stream probably stops on YouTube. I could probably just prevent us from keep talking into the break, but I don't want to run into anyone's break. Are there questions in the channel to some of our panelists? Otherwise, I open the discussions to the panelists themselves. I think Jonathan made a really nice statement in the end. Maybe Sheelagh wants to respond to that.
I switch on things here. Because I don't want to, we clearly are having some trouble with bandwidth, so I don't want to keep them on. So I don't know if any of you have read Saul and Bill's paper on usability considered controls some of the time, because it makes a fairly eloquent explanation about how you can take guidelines too far. And I think that Arzu and Sylvia were talking about that it depends, right? I mean, and yes, that there needs to be a time where, as you get more experience, you realize you're in a situation where it depends, where things have changed slightly and you must rethink, and that's really important. But, that doesn't mean that there isn't. So I completely agree with the statement that it's really good to learn them, it's really good to understand them, and I actually think that the more different people in the community actually talk openly about the guidelines that they work with and that they've developed, the more somebody who is learning will get to explore what is essentially a visualization voice. Like we can do it a la Jonathan Roberts. That yours have actually, permeated the community enough that probably people can try them on for size and see how much they fit them, and what they can gain from them. And I think that this is, it's a way in our distributed community that we can let learners experience kind of multiple apprenticeships, which I think is a nice thing to do. The break is going to happen now?
No. I'm just trying to navigate the questions document actually, but this is technology in the 21st century. We're having. Is anyone wanting to reply to Sheelagh?
I'll just jump in there and say, I think that's why I'm interested in this word theory rather than guidelines, because it opens up the idea that different people can have competing theories, and no theory is inherently right. I feel like guidelines is a little strict in that it has some kind of connotation that there's a right way to be doing things against an guideline. When, just like Sheelagh pointed out, it's more of a voice that people are proposing. When I talk to students about it, I like to say theory, because that's the language I've been educated in, but I think it would be nice to sort of implicitly suggest, as she was saying, that it's a perspective really, and there's different ones, and there can be, you can do direct comparisons between them and see which one works best for you.
Can I chip in there? I think that's a really nice idea of having a theory. Although I think some of the times where I would place those structures in, I actually want the students to do it my way. And I think having a theory sort of perhaps loosens that up. So I think I agree with that. There is a real place for this idea of theory. But I think when I'm teaching my students, I want them to do it in a very specific way, follow these structures, follow this process. I know best as a professor. So I think yeah. So I think there are places for both of those, I think, is what I'm saying.
Can I sit up in here? Actually, I think it might complement, yeah. So it's kind of on topic, I guess, exactly what we're talking about. I think that perhaps we can talk about some guidelines based on convention versus guidelines based on evidence. And I think that the evidence part is accumulating only now in the last 10 years or so. There's quite a lot of interest in actually conducting user studies and controlled user studies as well. Of course, every user study that is conducted in a controlled manner will be one variable at a time. And because of this, at some point we need to do meta-analysis to see exactly what actually emerges as a rule or a law or a theory. I think perhaps it's a bit early for us to talk about theories as a visualization community. Perhaps some of the things are emerging slowly towards that. And I think I agree that the word guideline sort of sounds like you know exactly what to tell you, where it's kind of misleading, and that's exactly why I think that maybe asking people rather questions than telling them, like rather than rules rather than questions. This is perhaps a little bit of a remedy to still guide them, but without telling them strictly what to do and what not to do. So eventually, I think we would get to that theory law part, but I feel like there's only a few items that are almost there, but we are not quite there to really pin down that this particular thing that we observe actually works under every context for every user, right? So perhaps the questions approach, I will still push that. Yeah.
Yes. Can I?
Please,
yeah. So I agree. I think that the problem, one of the big problems in our community is that I really actually think that the challenge of making, and you've given a set of data that's numbers and perhaps words, perhaps phrases, a bunch of things like that with possible relationships between them, and then something that is visual and spatial, that is a much bigger challenge than most of us can want to let on. This is, I think, one of the grand intellectual challenges that they have to make a really good mapping like that. I mean, and that's why some of the work like VIS is doing is so important, because it helps us, but we really need to realize that we are still newbies, really, even those of us that have been around a little bit, and that there's a lot we don't know, and that this is kind of a grand communicative and creative intellectual challenge. I definitely think I try and invite students into both the challenge and pleasure of that. It is exciting to be doing something that is difficult and to try out. I also really like to try and talk to my students about trying to give them, it's kind of like, more than one arrow in their quiver. That if they try in a particular way, and like often, you all know, you'll come up against this just not working, you need to have something else. You say, oh, well, let's try using somebody else's ideas and see if we can approach it in that way. The idea of being clear that the solution will still be findable even if your first path doesn't work. So, and also, I think that one of the amazing things is that we're talking more and more about design and talking more and more about guidelines in our community, and there's very little talk about the problems of design fixation, of like thinking that I must go this way. And so I do try, maybe a little early on, to try and talk to my students about not getting fixated. But I think that actually early on is a place to try. I know that in my classes, well, I mean, you know, like in our book we suggested 10, Jonathan suggests 5. It's like, but the resistance of almost all beginning students of going beyond 1 or 2 is enormous. Like, now they don't get to come and walk into my office and say, but this one is great. My first one, I'm really excited about this. But if I can actually get them to do 10, it's nearly always the 7 days per night that they actually get involved with. And I know that actually 10 is a limit. They should do more. It's not. So I do start right from the beginning about saying, do the work up front. Do more than one design. And even if it's yourself you're having discussions with.
Yeah, I agree. It's challenging to get some students to go past 1. Their first idea is the best. And I think for me it's nudging them. It's trying to see that there is worth in other ideas. And usually, as you said, rightly so, I reflect with that and agree with that. Then after they've done 5, 6 and more, they start realizing that actually these are better ideas. And I think that's why I sort of do this sort of carrot and stick, I guess. There is a bit more structure to some of my teaching where you have to sit down and do the practice to force them into that way, and then hopefully they will see the benefit for doing it later on in their own design. But yes, no, it's a challenge.
So somebody just said on the Discord thing about the IDEO cards. I don't know if you can see them, but you know there's mapping of them. And part of the thing is you can play games with zoom them out in different ways and just see if one of them will trigger. If you type in IDEO and their design cards, they charge a lot for them, but if you get a set, you probably will use them quite a bit. Anyway, they're available, and it's not. These are not guidelines. These are, there's usually a picture and a scenario, a possible scenario, and they're to look at and think, can I use ideas or approaches from this thing to help me in my current problem, right? And I think that part of it is, to me, a design methodology is all about thinking of the universe as your inspiration, and that means that you might be inspired by something that you see on the street as you walk to work, about, the way the tea leaves are on the bottom of your cup, whatever, that might trigger some kind of idea, but thinking of that broad way of looking at where ideas might come from, and that any of these might be useful. And I think that Georgia Rupi very nicely said that, one of the things we looked at your data, and there is 104 delightful, absolutely, totally original representations. And Georgia said that she will get out a piece of abstract art that she loves, and there might be some little thing in it somewhere that she finds useful in thinking about how to make a new design. And so, I have had a student who has just finished, who has been looking at, I don't know, you probably all know that engineering is enthralled with the idea of biomimicry, of learning from nature, that there are so many wonderful solutions that nature has come up with. And biomimicry is definitely something we can apply to visualization. And biology is so diverse.
We're having a question that is kind of relating to where the discussion is going. From kind of two related questions, I guess. One from Jan Ertz and one from Fanny Chevalier. The one is, how do you force the students to be creative, in a sense? So how do you force them potentially not to use guidelines, I guess? And this is related to what Fanny says, is how do you gracefully teach students without confusing them to not follow guidelines when they're having the right level of expertise? So where do you kind of, yeah, those were two questions in the Discord.
Can I jump into one?
Sure.
So in terms of like how not to sort of fixate them into a particular answer, I try to show them the same data plotted in multiple ways. I mean, there's this famous example of the dinosaur. Maybe some of you who's here, I don't remember. So I have also similar examples from my own data. So I would show something in 2 dimensions, the pattern would look exactly the same, then I would show it in 3D, and then you would see some anomaly, or vice versa. So I try to tell them that, okay, don't buy pie chart bad, bar chart good. Don't buy 3D bad, 2D good. Plot your data in more than one way and look at it from different perspectives. You might get different information. You might also appreciate yourself by experimenting like that, what actually serves a purpose. And then I also tell them that they shouldn't test this only on themselves. So some certain visualization design, if it works for you, I show them also some user studies in eye movements, and then I show them how naive users actually take 10 times longer to find the same information than, for example, an expert user. So this is kind of the instruction I at least try to preach. I don't know how much of it sticks, but there is a tendency, and I think Sarah was also saying that at some point in the comments, there's a tendency people, if they hear that at one study pie charts were shown to be bad, they want to take this as a simple message that pie charts are a no-no. But it's not, like usually there is nuance. You know, pie charts can be okay if you are showing part of, oh, this community knows them, but the students try to, or the naive users or new people to this domain, they tend to try to take the clean message and just run with that. And then they get this excited, passionate speeches about, 3D bad, pie chart bad, rainbow bad. It always depends. So I try to preach in the beginning and especially give them exercises that they can use some data set and plot in multiple ways and maybe they see something different, and that might help them try to differentiate early on that these guidelines are rough guidelines and that they have to customize for the context, for the data, for the audience. So that's how I try to approach. But obviously, you can reach, 30, 40, 50 students at a time. So this is really the bit larger outreach, I guess. More TED Talks.
This isn't about creativity per se, but I have lots of examples that I share with my students where we tested a myriad of different visualization techniques, and the one we thought would be best based on guidelines didn't turn out to be the best because there was some unknown bias that we didn't know about, we just discovered. I do hurricane visualizations, and there's one hurricane cone that has fuzzy or blurry boundaries, and we were all convinced that was going to be the best, and I asked the students to all guess which one they think would be the best, and it's not that one. That's not the one that ended up being the best after empirical studies. So I'd like to illustrate examples of where it's very hard to intuit the exact biases that might arise. So you simply must test things out and show them to people and ask, try to get some type of metric of how people understand this information. That's usually my approach, to show them how their own intuitions can be wrong, so therefore don't go with your first approach.
Can I jump in? I use 2 strategies. One is examples. So try and have upfront examples of previous 5 design sheets and give other students work and examples within data as well, so different visualizations. And not just from the traditional visualization community, but from the design community. And secondly, I try to give the students a VIS task that is their own. So they choose their own data set or have their own resource. That means that they can share their solutions without problems of plagiarism. And I think that's a powerful thing, that they're helping each other. And I think peer support is really important to get alternative ideas.
I think that what Jonathan has just said about peer support, I also do. I mean, I know it's more work for me because there's no comparison kind of stuff. For marketing, it's harder when you have everybody do something different. And there are all kinds of problems with that, but there are real benefits about them learning from each other. But I am really finding this peer learning, encouraging the peer learning across a distributed tech network where they don't get to hang out with each other is much more powerful. They are really missing the peer-to-peer, like, because the difficulty of actually showing like a little beginning demo, because if you're in the same lab, you'd all be aware of each other's work and what you're doing. You know, pass by it and have small discussions, and the importance and value of those things is it's subtle what we're losing, but it's profound.
I have a follow-up question. Has anyone found a good method to sort of simulate that online? I haven't. I'd love to hear if other panelists have figured out how to do.
I've tried with my group a bunch of different kinds of things, using Airtable, using Zero boards, and actually, oddly, one of the most successful is just using Google, not actually Google Sheets or anything like that, just having a shared folder that people could do sketches in front of them, snap them with their phone, and drag them in. And that it was better and closer, cleaner software, but less in the way. Any kind of actually document, the fact that it was just a folder and that people did it slightly differently worked much better. And actually, it was the first time this semester where I felt like, maybe that actually worked.
Which brings us into the domain of online learning, I guess. The challenges and possibilities of online learning.
So somebody in Discord says that they use Mural. We tried Mural too, and might be that. Yeah. Anyway, but there are. I think that somehow or other we need to have some kind of equivalent to where everybody can see what each other is doing and talk to each other, because eliminating peer-to-peer learning is much too big a loss for us to accept.
I agree.
I think quite hard to do sketching online. I was wondering if anyone has a good experience.
Well, the only thing that we have done is, and I have had resistance to people. Like usually I provide sketching materials. I just bring them in. So they don't have their own, they're just there. And so I've had to quite like, yes, just go to a corner store and spend $1 to get yourself some colored pencil. But the only thing that we've been able to come up with so far is that you sketch freehand in front of yourself, right? Take a snap and join it onto some virtual whiteboard of some kind. Or you're just, most of them will allow simple drag and drop, so it's not too difficult. But yeah, it's hard. Also, somebody else has one that I haven't tried, Lucid Spark. Anyway, there are a bunch of them out there. One of them, it depends on your university, because a lot of them require that you become a member, and so lots of universities say you cannot require that your students become members of different types of software that they haven't officially approved yet. I certainly have that trouble. I don't know if others do. But it's difficult. It's difficult, and it's difficult because real interplay between peers is not, that when we do this, we have to be very sequential. Someone talks, right? And real interplay between peers is not so sequential.
Can I? Yes, I agree with what Sheelagh's saying. You missed out on everyone coming together, chatting in the rooms as you're coming in. I wheel in a big box of pens and paper. They know what they're doing that day when I pick up my big box of pens and paper on a trolley. I think the simple solutions are better. I've tried shared whiteboards. Don't seem to work. I think our internet connection's not fast enough.
Well, maybe. Yeah, I don't know. I know that my best in-class exercise is, with Lego, and I can't ask them to buy enough Lego because that's non-trivial. I think it's several hundreds. And I know that actually people sneak into the Lego class who are not part of the class because they like doing it again. You can, in 3 hours of some of these Lego things, you can just see people go from not really getting what the problem is to really getting what the problem is. And the sketching I have somewhat been able to reproduce in online, they're not great, but the Lego I am just, or the tiles, where they have to go and laser cut their own tiles, I am just floored. I don't know what to do. Yeah.
I think, the sketching we've done is that everyone sketches themselves, like you're saying, they go to the dollar or pound store to get the cheap materials, and then they take a photograph or show it up at the screen. And that works okay. I've tried it with the sketching, but people then have to have either a tablet or some input in, and it doesn't quite work.
I think there's a lot to discuss. I have, of course, tons of questions, and there are tons of questions on the Discord channel. Just again, it's my job to keep this to time. We're already over, so I want to give everyone 15 minutes break before the next session starts, also in case someone wants to switch workshops. I want to thank all the panelists. I'm tempted to ask around the panelists to finish up with the one sentence of what do you think is, for you personally or in general, the most pressing challenge in teaching that it is, or not just teaching but also learning. So think broader than just this one, this teaching exercise. We could try to go through very quickly one sentence, and I'm going to stop you if you start a new sentence. We're starting just on the camera here, Lace.
Well, okay. I think the hardest problem in data viz is really synthesizing all of the different perspectives and approaches in a way that students are aware of the array of what I would call theories available to them, but different things they can use.
Thanks. Bob is next.
I think the biggest challenge that comes to my mind is answering the question, what are the visualization resources available to me? I get this question a lot, and this is a very challenging one.
Thanks. Next one is Arzu.
Right, so I guess because I'm teaching computer science students, it's hard for me to get them past that it's all about making it pretty. So they are very focused on aesthetics, and I'm like trying to hammer. This is about design, functional design. You want people to actually process the information correctly, and what you're doing, you have to think about if people actually receive the information that they are trying to receive. It's, in essence, it's information processing. So this is one of the bigger challenges. They seem to go back to pretty pictures. I don't know how to get over that for them.
Sheelagh?
I think I would probably just restate that to learn the balance between knowing and understanding guidelines, to once you've actually found one guideline, keep finding others and not taking anything too seriously.
And Jonathan?
I think, me was, I was going to say volume, but that was, I think there's just so many concepts. I think we need quick and easy guidelines to follow, and I think that's where we should try to be. I like the 5 design sheets. It's 5, all the way through. Try to keep it simple in that way.
Thanks everyone again. I'm really sorry that I have to close this discussion, but again, I want to give everyone a break, and I invite you to tomorrow's VisActivities workshop, where we have more time to discuss teaching and visualization, and hopefully we can then discuss the next steps, how to bring this topic forward. Thanks again, everyone, for joining. Have a nice break, and see you back in sort of 15 minutes for session number 2 by Alfie. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.